What is up, everybody? Brian Mendler back in your life on another edition of the podcast. And today I am super excited to be joined by Genia Stephen, coming to me from Canada, right? Up near, kind of near Toronto, yes?
Yeah, I'm about 4 hours east of Toronto.
And I could hear that just in the about. I love how y'all say that.
It's so funny because some people say I don't sound Canadian at all when I say about, and other people, it's the first thing they notice.
So what's going on? How are things up there?
Well, things are, still pretty intense. The rollout of vaccines here in Canada has been slower than anybody would have liked. And so we're still mostly unvaccinated. And we're in Ontario. This isn't true across the country, but in Ontario, our numbers have gone up. We're maybe facing another more significant lockdown, although we've, been experiencing restrictions for, a year. So it's pretty intense, but, the winter is basically over. It hasn't snowed in a while. And so I think that is, introducing some energy into most of my community at this moment.
Yeah. And, I don't live far from you. I live actually probably about an hour and 20 minutes from the Canadian border. And it stinks because the border's closed. And we actually enjoy coming up there. It's just such a great, especially in the summer, it's so many great places to go and hang out up there. So you really, you're involved in really advocating for special needs kids, correct? And what got you into that, and kind of where did that all come from for you?
Yeah. So I have a younger sister who has disabilities. And when my sister first was diagnosed, it was a really big deal for my mom. She'd never known anybody that had a disability. She'd not gone to school with kids with disabilities, never worked with anybody. And so she was distressed. And she had the great fortune of calling an organization who put her in touch with one parent who was farther along the journey than she was. And that parent put her in touch with other people. And she quickly grew to have a network of, fortuitously, real, actual world-class thought leaders and mentors in the field of disability. And so that was my upbringing, really, was, somebody last year said, "Oh, Genia, you were raised at the feet of Hollywood stars in the world of disability." And that's kind of true. I was that little kid attending the workshops and the conferences and the meetings and the reflections. And so I grew up in a really disability positive community. And then 15 years ago today is my son's birthday. My second son was born, and he has significant disabilities and medical complexities. And what really became apparent, I mean, I knew this, but I don't know, what really became apparent over the 10 years following my son's birth, was that the gap between my mom's experience, the gap between my experience starting my parenting journey and other parents starting their parenting journey around the same time as me, was just as wide as the gap between my mom's experience and mine. And so I started Good Things in Life in order to show up where parents are these days, which is online. When my mom first got a diagnosis, she called an organization who put her in touch with one parent. But now what parents do is, as soon as they have some sort of diagnosis, they go to Google. Google gives them a list of complications and things to be concerned about, and a list of diagnosis-specific Facebook groups.
So I'm curious, take me back a little bit. What was going on with your sister? Let's start with her. So what specifically, when you say she had a disability, what specifically did you see going on with her?
Yeah. So my sister has an intellectual disability and some weakness on one side of her body. Actually, right now she's sick. So she's paralyzed right now, but growing up, that was not the case. And to be honest, I didn't see very much. Like, to me, there was really not much to see. So when my mom told me that my sister had a disability, she was very somber and very serious when she was explaining this to me. And I responded by crying, because I could tell that was the appropriate response, but nothing she was saying actually seemed to be all that somber and and serious.
Sure.
I was a bit confused by that at the age of 5. And, really my perception about my sister and her disability came from not what I observed, but what I in her, but what I observed and what I heard other people say and how they treated her.
Which was what? What did you hear?
Well, when we were going, so, I was born in 1976, so just
Me
to
too.
frame the timelines. And so
When's your birthday, by the way?
February 6th.
All right, so you're a little bit older than me. Mine's April 27th coming up. So you just
Coming
turned
up.
45. Yeah.
I just turned 45.
Happy birthday.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank
No
you.
problem.
And to
Yeah.
you too this month.
I know. This is the time in life where it's not super exciting to have birthdays. Would you agree? It's kind of just like another one.
It is definitely not super exciting to have birthdays, but I have to say I do love being in my 40s. So
it's not bad.
For me, it's pretty great. I feel like I never really was a little kid. And so I've kind of like always been in my 40s, and now I just get to like live it to its fullest.
Makes sense.
So, when we first started to, when my sister was first being diagnosed, we were going to all these assessments and testing centers, and, and they would just ask her to do ridiculous things. And so, they would say, oh, here, hold on to this pencil and don't let me take it out of your hand. And they would pull it and it would slide out of her hand. And they would say, well, she, doesn't have much strength. But this was the same kid that would grab me by my toes and drag me around the living room while our dog Jenny licked my face, right? So so it felt a little bit like an inside joke, but yet there was this sort of message about kids with disabilities being a real deficit focus. And then when she got old enough to go to school, she couldn't come to our neighborhood school with me because they didn't accept kids with disabilities. And so my parents ended up having to buy a empty lot of land 45 minutes away so that they could pay taxes in that school district.
No way.
So that she could go to that school, which was only partially inclusive. And so there was also, a lot of learning as a young child about the fact that people with disabilities are unwanted in places in our community, and that they are devalued and not seen to have the same potential or the same contributions to make as other kids.
No question. And, so you kind of glossed over it, and I can't let you gloss over it. Did you say she's paralyzed now?
Yeah, sorry. Yes. So in November of this year, of last year, a few months ago, she developed Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is one of those just random struck by lightning autoimmune conditions where you get an extremely mild harmless virus and then your body goes haywire and attacks your nerves. So she was in intensive care for 4 months, an hour away from me, and I was living in the hospital with her because of the pandemic. We couldn't have multiple people to support her, so I just basically lived in the hospital for 4 months. And she's now not in intensive care; she's off life support, but still completely paralyzed, and it takes months and months and months and months for your nerves to repair. So she's having a hard time right now. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
It's pretty intense.
Is she older sister or younger?
She's younger. She's 3.5 years younger than I am.
So you've kind of probably had that big sister, mentality your whole life, where you've looked out for her, and your thought process has been to take care of her.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, it's funny because she's taller than I am. And as soon as she grew taller than me, she started calling me her little sister. And so, it's kind of an ongoing joke with us about who's the big sister and who's the little sister. And I would say that we take care of each other, but that looks different for each of us. My sister is one of the most thoughtful, like she really needs to know where her loved ones are, and that they're okay, and that everything's all right. And, you know, she's
Mhm.
really loves to be supportive and to take care of us. And then, of course, our support for her includes, you know, things that currently, I mean, eventually, unless I die beforehand, at some point, hopefully, I'm going to need the same kinds of supports that
Sure.
she needs, right?
Yeah.
But at this time in our lives, yeah, the support has been different. And but we're mutually supportive.
Tell me a little bit about your son
So
or your
Will, as I
sons. You have two
said,
sons.
I have two sons. Yep, I have two sons and a daughter. And
How old
my
are they? Your kids?
so Will is 15 today. Zach will be 18 next month, and Nala will be 8 in July.
Okay. So a
So
little spacing there.
yes, well, Nala is not my daughter by birth. So
Got
yeah,
it.
she was little later addition to our core household.
Was she adopted?
Um, no, Nala is my niece's daughter, and my niece died a year ago, and yeah, it's been a hell of a year.
I'll tell you.
So yeah, so Will is amazing. I'm so incredibly proud of him. You know, he's um, faced just so much for a 15-year-old. And, you know, I've always said, you know, when my firstborn was born, I found joy, like true, pure joy for the first time in my life. And when Will was born, he brought me total peace. Not that I am always peaceful
Right.
at all, but just like a you know, a true feeling of peace that I had never experienced before. And that, I think, just comes from who he is, you know, like he is a tremendously warm, peaceful, forgiving, you know, joyful, adventurous teenager. And yeah, he's great. The last year has been hard, of course, because he's not, you know, none of the kids are able to be together, and, you know, the pandemic has affected all of us in similar ways. But you know, he's doing great at school. It's taken us a really long time to help him with alternative forms of communication.
So
And
tell about him.
Mhm.
Give a little background of when you say that, what specifically is going on with him
Yeah, so Will doesn't speak verbally, and so
at
he
all?
uses no.
Completely nonverbal.
Yeah, so he uses a combination of facial expressions and head movements, and then a symbol system to communicate. And the symbol system has taken a really long, you know, a really long time to sort out, partially because, you know, just trying to figure out, Will has limited ability to use his body intentionally. So, you know, access to alternative forms of communication have been a significant challenge, and he has a visual impairment. So visual access has been, you know, like it's just been complicated. Um, but he and his school team have been working really hard on it for years, and he's gotten to the point now. For many years ago, I finally said to the school, "Okay, stop trying to assess him," and I his IEP had been entirely curriculum based up until that point. I said, okay, we're going to take the curriculum off entirely, and all you're going to do is model his AAC system. And the thing you're going to talk to him about when you're modeling the AAC system is whatever the teacher is teaching. You know, we'll get the curriculum in that way, because they were just stuck in how to assess,
Hmm.
and it was keeping Will back, but it was also keeping the creativity and the skills of the educators back, because they couldn't figure this one bit out. So we just took that out. But Will's in grade 9 this year, and his high school teachers all came to us and said, okay, listen, I know the curriculum hasn't been on Will's IEP, but he's passing all of our tests. So let's make sure, you know, we change it up and get him credit earning again so we can graduate from high school. So we're pretty proud of him that he's been able to, you know, prove himself.
So what
Yeah.
was he? So I just had a baby. What when he was in your stomach, did you know what was going on? Was there any way to tell, or did you
No.
just kind of think he was going to be born, you know, and then, you know, so tell a little bit about that. You just
Yeah.
born, and when did you first find out that he couldn't talk or wasn't going to talk?
Right. So we didn't know. We didn't do any genetic testing prenatally, although even if we had, it would have come back fine. And when Will was born, we had a very, very difficult birth, and he required a full resuscitation and suffered a brain injury during the birth process. So he spent the first, I guess I remember, I think he was in the hospital the first time, like right after birth, for 6 weeks. And when we were getting ready to go home, I remember saying to the pediatrician, okay, that's over. Now we just need to start thinking about this kid, like this baby is just like a baby, and a normal kid, and move forward. And I probably wouldn't have used the words normal kid, because I avoid that kind of language, but I remember him just saying, okay, Genia, and thinking, huh. And
Like he kind of knew. No.
Yeah, and so did I. But I was like,
you did.
I was definitely trying to reframe, for sure. I mean, Will's injury was very significant. But I was determined, and have remained determined, to really focus on who he is as a person, and what his life's purpose is, and not around his disability. But that was one of the moments, that was one of those uncomfortable moments where I thought, oh, I wonder if this injury is more significant than I thought.
So you call it an injury. Is that it? So explain that a little bit. Like, because you said tell me again exactly what happened.
So without getting into too graphic of details.
Long story short,
he got stuck and deprived of oxygen.
Got it.
And experienced a brain injury. That's the technical term is hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. And
got it.
Yeah. So, but hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy, or HIE, can range from almost no visible, no detectable long-term outcomes, or more significant
how do you get stuck outcomes. I'm like, what do you mean he got stuck?
He got stuck on the way out, Brian.
So,
you can just sort of use your imagination.
No. The reason I'm asking that is because my son got stuck too. My first son got stuck, and I'm not saying it was the same, but I remember being in the hospital, and the doctor came in, and we went from calm to all of a sudden they were like, we're taking him now. And they were very calm about it. They were like, he basically said his head was too big, he couldn't fit out, and they were going to take him out in a C-section. And so he was stuck. So they went in and they took him out, and that was that. So did they not notice that, or were they not able to get to it quick enough? Is it different?
It's different. There was no malpractice or neglect in this, it wasn't like that. I mean, I think so. Part of my background is that.
Sorry.
Yeah, sure. No, that's okay. Part of my background is that I've been a practicing midwife for more than 10 years now. So clinically, I can talk about this as well. There are many situations in which a baby can be compromised during the birth process, and many of them we can mitigate by cesarean section, instrumental birth, medications, or far less invasive methods as well. But the reality is that babies and mothers, even in the best of situations, still sometimes are harmed or die during childbirth. And it's not common, but it happens, and it's not always anybody's fault.
Got it. Got it. So that was, when you say injury, that's what that was. So he was, I mean, I know you don't like using the term, neither do I, but basically he was quote unquote normal all the way through. And then that's where it happened, when he was coming out.
So Will probably has an underlying genetic thing going on as well. But we didn't know that prior to his birth. And as I said, if we had tested, it wouldn't have come up. We still don't know, what, if anything, it might be.
Sure.
So, Yeah. So I think, he's got a combination of realities
So
going
what was
on
it
for him.
like? What was it like raising him, like from a social standpoint, from a, like, what did you have to kind of learn how to be a mom all over again? Were you learning all new things along with him?
I mean, there are certainly some things that I learned, there certainly some things I learned about his medical complexities and, issues that I didn't know prior to needing to know. But no, I mean, we're always on a lifelong learning journey. So I don't want to suggest that I had crossed the finish line prior to having Will and, and then just continued to exist in some sort of parenting nirvana,
Right.
through his life, because that's obviously not true. But, you know, I think that's in some ways the gap that I'm talking about, like I was raised in a disability positive community. I had already had a lot of opportunity to learn about devaluation and marginalization of people with disabilities. And I'd already had a lot of opportunity to think deeply and to live in ways that help people to remain at the heart of community and lead typical fulfilling lives. So, um, which, in the year 2021 should be everybody's reality. It's really,
No doubt.
it's really kind of gobsmacking that we still live in societies where people with disabilities are not central contributing citizens because they are kept at the margins. Um,
Do
so
you feel like it's better
yeah,
though today than it was? Like, do you see improvement? I mean, you live in that
yes,
world, so do you see it getting better?
I see it getting better in many really important ways. And yet I see people's experience being, um, like we still have in North America, we still have the vast majority of adults with intellectual disabilities living in traditional services. They go to day programs and they live in residential services. And so
Yeah.
when you're measuring positive change, it is absolutely there, but we still have a massive problem on our
So I'm
hands.
curious, like my audience is really teachers and administrators and
Yeah.
educators. What are some things that you as a mom would like to see from us, right? To make this world a better, more inclusive place for your kids and for our kids.
Yeah. I think the single most important thing that educators can do is, as a classroom teacher in particular, to make the adjustment from thinking that special education students are the responsibility of special educators to seeing the responsibility of classroom teachers to be teaching everybody in their classroom
Yeah.
and to be using special education resources and expertise to support the classroom teacher and not to replace them.
Yeah, I like
So
the
I
go
think,
ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
go ahead.
No,
Just, I think that's the most
I was
significant
gonna,
thing.
yeah, and I was gonna say as a teacher, I was a special education teacher for 9 years, and the mindset of your kid, my kid, right? Like
Hmm.
that often happened where I would be in a staff meeting and a teacher would say, "Your kids have been disrupting the hallway," and I'd be like, "My kids? Like when my kid steals your car, whose kid is it now?" Like there's no my
Yeah.
kid, your kid. There's our world, right? And
Yeah.
for me, the goal was for everybody. And I would say to the regular ed teachers, why don't you all come down to my room and get to know my kids and like talk to them and see them and ask them questions and be a part of their life. And it
Hmm.
riled me, and I was one of those people who stood up, right? I was one of those people who in a staff meeting would raise their hand and be like, which kids are you talking about? Right. Because my kids
Hmm.
have names,
Hmm.
your kids are out of control. So I'm in full agreement with you. And I think that's incredibly important. What about some specific strategies? Like what are some specific strategies that teachers can use, especially let's go with the nonverbal, because that's one that I hear a lot from teachers, kids that either choose not to talk, which is sometimes the case,
Hmm.
or can't. And so, what
Hmm.
are some specific strategies that you all have used or you've seen teachers use with him from an early age that you feel like have been really successful?
Mm-hmm. Well, if I can, I just want to loop back around
Sure.
to something you just said. So I think that whenever you have a class of kids that are segregated from their peers, they are us and them. Like you've established that they are your kids, not their kids, right? Because their kids go to the class. Their kids, like if the patterns, if the location, the patterns, the routines, the content is all different, then it is an us and them. So, when I'm talking about teachers really taking on the responsibility to teach all the kids in their class, that means all the kids are in their class with their grade level peers, right? There is no separate place. And then I think as far as once kids are in those classes, what are we doing?
So I just want to let me just
Yeah,
jump in. So are you saying that you don't think there should be quote unquote self-contained classes? Like what is that kind of
correct.
what you're saying? Like once you've
Absolutely.
established a self-contained class, you've immediately already said there's no our kids, there's your kids, my kids. The minute you
Correct.
do that. Got it.
Absolutely.
Got it. Yeah, that
Absolutely.
makes
I
sense.
mean, think about this. Like if you take any other group of marginalized people and you substitute our education model where you've got self-contained classrooms, like it would be considered nobody would think that was okay.
Right.
Nobody thinks that would be okay.
Right.
So
Like you're saying, like, for example, if somebody said, let's take, the Asian kids and put them all in one class, right? Or, right. That not only would it not be okay, it would be utterly outrageous. It would be
right,
it would be the lead story on any newscast, right? People
right,
would be like, are you kidding me? You can't do that with a group of people. And yet
right,
that's what we do a lot of times with special ed
right.
kids. No
And I
question.
think it is outrageous.
I hear
And
you.
it's outrageous that it's not considered outrageous.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, I think one of the things that, anybody can take responsibility for thinking about is just, the one of the most significant sentinel events in a young person's life is to be removed from the heart of community, whether that's because they're marginalized because of, they lose their family and they're put into the foster system, because they have a disability and they're put into segregated services, because they are ghettoized because of socioeconomic and racial injustice. Being taken out of the heart of community is a sentinel wounding event from which it is very hard to come back. And so one of the things that educators can do is think about never taking kids out of the heart of community of the heart of the school community in the first place. And so that means kids being in the same class together and learning together.
Right.
Yeah.
Because and I say the same thing. Like people act like you're doing your good, quote unquote, good kids a favor by taking the disruptive ones or the difficult ones out of class, which really you're not, because those quote unquote good kids, they have to live in the same world with the disruptive ones, and they have to potentially be in the same office at a job. And like this notion that we're helping, and I think that's the argument, right? I think the argument for why they do it is, well, what about all the other kids? And can we really give these kids the services that they need and the other kids the services that they need at the same time? How do you
Right.
respond to that? Because I do think that's the pushback that you'll hear from a lot of teachers.
Yeah, so I think that on the surface, I get that, except that we have decades and decades of research that says that the outcomes for all students improve when they are educated together. And so this isn't about research, because I can lay that and have laid that research out for people over and over again. And this is a mindset issue. This is a mindset issue. It's not about whether or not we know whether or not inclusive education is better for kids. We do. There's no, I mean, it's a little bit like climate change, right? Like we've got the evidence. And so, but if you are committed to saying that climate change is not a thing, then you're going to keep saying it no matter what, right? Until maybe you have an experience that helps you to think a little bit, peel back the layers of the onion, and really consider it. Now, we also have a lot of structural problems in our education systems that have nothing to do with kids with disabilities that make it harder to include all children. So that's a fact. I'm not suggesting that all educators are just discriminatory, people who like,
Right.
this is
Of course.
multi-layered, right?
No,
It's
it's not, look,
multi-layered.
it's not their fault. I mean, that
No,
we're not the ones who create the system. The system is
right,
what it is. We play within the
right,
system, right?
right. Yeah,
It's like playing baseball and being a pitcher and playing in the National League. Like, you got to learn
yeah,
how to hit. You might
yeah,
not like that, but that's part of the system that we're in. I mean,
exactly.
I was a self-contained teacher, and I agree with you. I think for them, although I do think, I will say, I do think that for certain kids, the small class size of being able to be with only 5 kids or 6 kids, there was definitely good to that. There was definitely benefit in general that I saw in that, for sure. But I
Hmm.
think overall, I agree with you.
Right. So, teachers could be advocating, as they already do, or I should say continuing to advocate, because I know they already do, for smaller class sizes. Like, there's nothing actually about a self-contained class. Like, none of the arguments for a self-contained class hold up when you look at them, right? So if kids need smaller class sizes, then let's advocate for
Right.
smaller class sizes, not for marginalizing
Right.
people in our community. And when you think about, I mean, there's so many different ways we could take this, but there are places, New Brunswick is Canada is one example. The entire province doesn't have self-contained classrooms. Like, this isn't, I think for lots of educators, part of the struggle is that you need to see it to believe it. But in order to actually see it, first you have to believe it. And then you have to be working, from whatever your purview is within the system. You need to be working towards creating it as a reality. But first you have to believe it.
Yeah.
And that can be hard.
The only place I where I kind of say, well, is the violence. Is sometimes you have kids that are, and I agree with you when it's emotional, but when it's physical violence, like, and I'm just looking at it from the perspective of a parent, right? If I'm a parent and I am a parent, right? And I have a kid, you have to keep my kid physically safe, right? My kid, I mean, emotionally, I can, like, if my kid, and I said this, right? If my kid is sitting in a class and next to another kid who's disruptive or difficult or makes inappropriate sounds or what, I'm fine with that. Like, I'm going to say to my kid, deal, right? Deal with it.
Mhm.
But if there's like a physical aggression toward other kids, I just think it's hard to keep that kid in that class sometimes.
Mhm. I agree, but I'm going to make a corollary to the prison system. So who's in the prison system? Right? So you've got, the prison system is designed, one, for punishment,
Yeah.
theoretically for rehabilitation, although we know that
Right.
doesn't work. And I'm like carefully considered self-contained classrooms. So, punishment, rehabilitation, although we know it doesn't work, same with self-contained classrooms. Um, and to keep general society safe, right? But when you look at who ends up in prisons, it is disproportionately representative of marginalized communities, not because marginalized communities are a greater threat to society, and self-contained classrooms are the same way. So the number of children in schools who are actually a physical threat, especially when you take out the stress, strain, trauma, and wounding of being marginalized and treated like a marginalized
Sure.
person, right? The level of violence tends to go down, right? Um, so then you're left with an even smaller pool of kids
Yeah.
who are physically potentially acting out.
Yeah.
So let's say, okay, maybe you've got a kid who is a physical threat to the other children, but then what's the 98% of other kids in self-contained classrooms?
Right.
What's the reason for them?
Right.
And I
Right.
feel like we have these sort of like sexy excuses, like the violent kid, right? But it doesn't explain what we're doing. It really doesn't explain what we're doing. And for the violent kid, we need to be thinking about, if you are going to function in society, how is it that we're going to help you to do that,
Yeah.
right? What are the triggers that you're experiencing? What supports do you need? How can the classroom be changing and accommodating you so that you can come from where you are today and slowly, as you're
Right.
able, build your skills and
Yeah.
capacity to function in a healthy and adaptive way, right? But we know, just like the prison system, that taking a kid who's violent and putting them in a self-contained classroom with other violent kids is not going to work.
Right. Right.
So
Not only that, but the opposite is really what the answer is, right?
Exactly.
It's really deep down looking at where's that violence coming from, what's causing it, and
Exactly.
oftentimes it's being caused by, a need for power and control, or a need for attention. And when we can look at, one of the lines that I use with teachers is that behaviors are not the problem; they're the solutions that kids pick to their problems. There's a phrase in education that we use called behavior problem when we refer to certain kids, right? Oh, you got that kid in your class? He's been known to be a behavior problem. No, right? Behaviors are the solutions, right? The real problem is somebody notice me, somebody pay attention to me, somebody give me some power and control, somebody make me feel good about my academics, right? Somebody make me belong, right? I don't have any friends, or I don't get along with people. So what do I do because of that? I act out, or I lash out, or I argue back, right? And so when we can view behaviors as the solution versus the problem, I think it gives all of us a huge leg up on trying to help it and fix it. And I agree. And you might have heard of her. She's out of Canada. Have you heard of Barbara Coloroso? Do you know her? Okay. So she wrote one of my favorite books called The Bully, the Bullied, and the Bystander. And she kind of talks about this process of taking the bully and putting them in charge, right? And you don't not only do you not punish them, but you put them on the playground and you call them bully patrol, and you give them a vest that says bully patrol, and they get to walk around and make sure nobody else is getting picked on, right? So you utilize the thing that they're struggling with to their advantage, which is an incredibly powerful thing, which is kind of the opposite of putting them in self-contained.
Right. Yeah. Right? I mean, I remember the boys, particularly in my elementary school, who were most vulnerable to disruptive and potentially aggressive and dangerous behavior. And one of the things that was really powerful for them was their arm's length relationship with my younger sister when she finally did come to our elementary school, because they felt pretty darn good about making sure that nothing happened to her on the playground. Genia's little sister. And so there's lots of what you're saying that is really, really valid, and I agree with you. And yet I want to just bring it back to that, and yet we're talking about a sliver of the percentage of kids that are in self-contained classrooms, right? And so we need to come back to that. So one of the things you asked about was, what are we doing, or what did we experience for our son? What were some of the tactics that the educators used? So one of the reasons that we chose the school that we did was because there was no self-contained, there was no possibility of him going into segregated programming, because it didn't exist in that school. And it didn't exist in that school because because there were no kids with significant disabilities that had gone to the school yet. It was a new school and small. Not in the class size numbers necessarily, but it wasn't like a massive kind of. And so, I mean, one of the most significant things that's contributed to his learning has just been the role modeling of his peers, right? So he can't speak verbally, but he still needs to understand what people are saying, and he still needs to learn the language. And in fact, it's a French school, so he's not French immersion, but a totally French school. So we speak English at home. He speaks, is educated in French, and so he needs to learn the cadence, he needs to learn the grammar, he needs to learn all of that. And if he were in a self-contained classroom, he'd be with other kids with communication difficulties. And so he'd lose that richness, No
doubt.
And he, gets a lot of, the kids do a lot of, it's a little different. It's a little different now. It's very different now because of the pandemic, but over the years at different times, there would be differing amounts of group work. So he would also have the opportunity not just to hear what the teacher was saying, but to hear the kids talk about the content and the curriculum. And to use his AAC system to talk to the kids about the content as well. And so that peer interaction, in addition to the teaching strategies, was really powerful and important. And then, because he's been educated with the same kids more or less, throughout his school years, the kids all know each other well, which also means that there's lots of social opportunities. And while that's not directly curriculum related, it still is, really powerful aspect of
It's the most important thing for me. I mean, and I learned that through the pandemic, right? Like there's, I have a third grader and a first grader now. And, for me, what I've learned through the pandemic is the reason I send my kids to school is for the social interaction. Like I could, no disrespect to the teachers, but I can do the academic stuff at home. I mean, they got all kinds of tools for that nowadays. They've got, the iPads and you can find basically anything you need from an academic standpoint. From a social standpoint, that was a whole other ballgame. And that was that was by far the piece that my kids missed the most when school let out early last year.
Yeah. And I was speaking to Gordon Porter, who's educator and consultant. And one of the things that he said essentially is that, we used to send our kids to school to become manufacturing workers, essentially, and this is not exactly the way he said any of this. I'm butchering him,
okay.
But essentially now we send our kids to school to become contributing citizens in a just and equitable world, a just and equitable society, right? Which bolsters what you're saying. And so in order to do that, you actually have to be part of that society, part of that school society. So that's all been really impactful.
Did you have any teachers early in his life that struggled to teach him, like that did you have any tough, placements for him where you kind of had to be a mom and battle through certain things?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I don't think any parent goes through their kid's school career and loves every teacher and has the teacher love their child every year. We had one year where the teacher was just frankly ill-equipped, more so than the other teachers. But I think that, to be honest, probably universally every teacher has felt ill-equipped, and that's okay. One of the things that I always really try and communicate to everybody involved in my son's education is that I expect you to mess up, and I expect you to tell me about it, and I expect you to tell me how I can help. So, this, even though we have tremendous knowledge available about how to build inclusive schools and inclusive classrooms and how to include kids with significant disabilities, it's still not part of the experience and expertise of most educators. We had one year where it really was a bust with the teacher. And I think actually the teacher was kind of just in general a bust. That teacher didn't stay very long, but in general, we've worked with teachers who don't feel particularly well equipped, but who are interested in being really good teachers. And
it's hard. Look, I don't think there's anything more difficult really for a teacher than.
No, it terrifies me. I can't even imagine why anybody would choose to do it.
No, but especially
that, to me.
right? Yeah, like it's one thing to have a class of kids who can communicate, but it's a whole other thing to have, a kid who can't communicate, and what an incredibly challenging thing that is for the teacher, but also really for the kid. I mean, that to me, that would be like my son stutters, and so he's not like your son. I mean, but I see what it's like when you have a hard time, when you can think it up here in your brain, but you can't get it out your mouth, right? And you're trying to get it out, and other kids are flying through certain things, and you're kind of the one sitting there like, well, I know what I want to say. I figured out that a while ago, but getting it to my mouth is an incredibly hard thing. And the frustration and anxiety that causes in my son, I can't imagine it being at a whole other level to where literally he could never get it out.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's true. That's a real frustration. But can you imagine how terrible it would be if somebody said, because you can't get it out, you don't get to go to school with your peers?
Of course.
Like,
of course.
That's what we're telling kids when we put them in self-contained classes, right? Not only do you have to deal with this frustration that your impairment may bring to your life, or bring to your life at moments, not only do you have to deal with a society who might tease you about your stutter, but actually we're going to put you somewhere else and say, you don't get to, you don't get to have the same experiences and opportunities as your peers. Like, what does that tell you about yourself and your potential?
No doubt about it. Well, listen, these 45 minutes go quick. Is there anything, I always ask people, is there any last bit of knowledge or information that you would like to leave everybody with?
I think just the looping back around to people's, every educator has the opportunity to just decide to take responsibility for reflecting on their purview and their role and what they can do in order to move our school systems towards truly inclusive models of education. And for classroom teachers, that means having kids in their class with disabilities and thinking about those kids as their students as well, and recognizing that there is a wealth of information out there that can help you do this well, and not that it's harder work. It's just different work. It's already hard. It's already hard. It doesn't get harder with kids with the disabilities in your class. It's just different.
No question. How can people find you if they want to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so all of my contact information is available on my website, goodthingsinlife.org, and people can check out the Good Things in Life for Kids with Disabilities podcast if they're podcast listeners, which of course they are because they're listening to your podcast.
Let's hope. That's the goal. All right. Well, Genia, it was a pleasure getting to know you and talking to you, and I really appreciate you joining me.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's been great.
All right. Everybody else, don't forget to rate, subscribe, download, review. Shout us out on social media. Tell me what you like. I will be back with you same time next week. Until then, I say peace. I'm out of here.